Starfield is not literally the Elder Scrolls 6, obviously. Not set in Tamriel, doesn't have elves, Daedra, Dwemer ruins, guilds, dragons, the Imperial City, but in the way that matters, Starfield might be the closest thing we have to the Elder Scrolls 6. Because Starfield is Bethesda showing us what Bethesda currently thinks a Bethesda RPG is. Not the Bethesda in your memory, not the Bethesda that made you walk out of the Imperial sewers for the first time, not the Bethesda that had made Skyrim feel like a country you could get lost in for 400 hours. Current Bethesda, modern Bethesda, the Bethesda that has to make the Elder Scrolls 6. And that makes Starfield important, whether you liked it or hated it. Starfield is not just a space RPG that disappointed a lot of people, it's a diagnostic test that shows the current state of the machinery. So the question is not just, was Starfield good? The question is, what does Starfield tell us about the future of Bethesda RPGs? Because if Starfield had Daedra, elves, magic ruins, and Elder Scrolls nostalgia glued onto it, I think a lot of people would have defended it much more aggressively. The problem is that Starfield did not have the armor of an old beloved world. It had to prove that Bethesda's design philosophy still worked on its own, and that's where things get uncomfortable. Bethesda games have never really been about polish. That's not why people loved them. Nobody played Oblivion because the combat was a miracle of game design. Nobody played Skyrim because the faction quest lines were all masterfully written. Nobody played Fallout 3 because every system was perfectly balanced. People loved those games because they felt like places. That's Bethesda's real magic. You leave the sewer, you see a ruin, you walk towards it. On the way, you find a cave, then a bandit attacks you, then you see a shrine, then you pick up a weird book, then a quest starts, then you forget what you were originally doing. That's the loop. A good Bethesda game doesn't just give you content, it interrupts you. Interruption is the Bethesda formula. The game gives you a goal, but the world keeps getting in the way. Not in an annoying way, in the best way. The world says, yeah, you can go do the main quest, but what's that over there? And suddenly you're 3 hours deep into some tomb because you followed a road, saw a door, and decided your actual destiny was inside this random hole in the ground. That's what made Skyrim work. That's what made Oblivion work. The games were dense enough that wandering felt meaningful, even when the actual content was simple, even when the dungeon was repetitive, even when the reward was garbage. The act of moving through the world had value. The road mattered, the distance mattered, the space between places mattered, and Starfield breaks that fundamentally. Starfield is a game about space where travel often feels like using a filing cabinet. You select a planet, you select the landing zone, you select the mission marker, you watch a transition, you appear near the thing you chose. Technically, that is freedom. You can go to many planets, you can land in many places, you can scan rocks and shoot pirates and enter facilities and collect loot. But the feeling is different because Starfield turns exploration into selection. That's the most damning thing about it. In the Elder Scrolls 6, you don't just select a destination, you travel through a world. The world has continuity. Whiterun is connected to Riverwood. Riverwood is connected to Helgen. The road to High Hrothgar becomes part of the memory. You remember walking, you remember seeing something in the distance and deciding to go there. Even fast travel works differently in those games because fast travel is something you use after the world has already established itself as continuous. You can skip the road because you know the road exists. In Starfield, the reason it doesn't work is because they took away the roads. Space should have been the greatest road Bethesda ever made, but instead it's a menu. Space is hard to design. It's huge and mostly empty. Realistically, traveling between planets is not like walking to Whiterun to Riften. I get it. But that's exactly the design problem Bethesda chose when they made Starfield. They picked a setting where their greatest strength, dense environmental exploration, became harder to deliver. Then they replaced density with scale. The scale is not the same as wonder. That's the mistake at the center of Starfield. 1,000 planets sounds incredible in marketing language. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like the biggest Bethesda game ever. But Bethesda worlds do not become memorable because they're huge. They become memorable because they're textured. Skyrim is not actually that big. Oblivion's not actually that big. Morrowind is not that big, but they feel large because they are dense with identity. You remember places. You remember the atmosphere, you remember the road, the town, the mountain, the weird NPC, the faction hall, the ruin you stumbled into by accident. A single province can feel bigger than a galaxy if the province has texture and the galaxy does not. And that's the danger for The Elder Scrolls 6. The Elder Scrolls 6 doesn't need to be the biggest RPG ever made. It doesn't need 1,000 cities. It doesn't need infinite radiant caves. It doesn't need procedural nothing stretched into the horizon so Bethesda can say the map is enormous. It needs to feel like a place. It needs roads, it needs wilderness, it needs cities with politics and smell and history. It needs ruins that feel like civilizations died there that aren't randomly generated. It needs factions that feel compromised. It needs strange rooms. It needs things you were not looking for. Bethesda does not need better speeches. Bethesda needs stranger rooms. Another thing Starfield exposes. Bethesda's writing problem isn't just dialogue. People like to talk about bad dialogue. Sure, but Starfield has plenty of stiff conversations. But the deeper issue is that Bethesda's storytelling works best when the world carries the story. Morrowind isn't beloved because every line of dialogue is naturalistic and cinematic. It's beloved because the world feels alien, religious, political, ancient, and hostile. The setting itself is doing enormous work. Oblivion isn't remembered because it's subtle. It's remembered because it's theatrical and weird and charming in a way that feels almost impossible to recreate on purpose. Skyrim isn't complicated, but it is mythic. It understands mountains, ruins, snow, dragons, old kings, dead empires, and the feeling of being very small under a very large sky. Starfield has lore, it has factions, it has history, it has aesthetic ideas, but too often it feels clean, light, corporate, managed. It feels like a universe where the rough edges have been sanded down before they had a chance to become interesting. That scares me for The Elder Scrolls 6, because Tamriel cannot feel like a theme park about Tamriel. The Elder Scrolls works when the world feels older than you, stranger than you, and not entirely interested in making itself comfortable for you. Danger should feel dangerous, magic should feel feared and abused, ancient ruins should feel like tombs, not content nodes. Action should have ugly incentives, cities should feel like people live there, lie there, die there. If The Elder Scrolls 6 takes the wrong lessons from Starfield, it could look exactly right and still feel hollow. That's the scariest version of The Elder Scrolls 6 to me. Not a disaster, not a completely broken game, not some universally hated failure, a competent game, a smooth game, a pretty game, a game with mountains and armor and magic and dramatic music and a trailer that makes everyone lose their minds. But underneath that, it feels like Starfield. Fragmented, safe, overmanaged, too dependent on markers and menus and curated points of interest. Elder Scrolls' skin stretched over a design philosophy that no longer understands why people loved the Elder Scrolls. Why I say Starfield is the Elder Scrolls 6, because it shows us the Bethesda that will be making the Elder Scrolls 6. It shows the assumptions, it shows the instincts, it shows what they think scale means. It shows what they think exploration means, it shows what they think player freedom means. And to be fair, Starfield isn't worthless. I don't think the whole game is garbage, but there are things in it worth preserving. The shipbuilding is interesting. The NASA punk aesthetic has moments where it really works. Some of the faction concepts are strong. The combat's better than Bethesda usually manages. There are quiet moments where you can see the game it wanted to be, but its biggest ideas are trapped inside of a structure that weakens Bethesda's traditional strengths. That's what matters. Starfield is valuable because it is diagnostic. It tells us what Bethesda needs to avoid carrying into The Elder Scrolls 6 unchanged. Don't replace exploration with destination selection. Don't replace density with scale. Don't replace mystery with exposition. Don't replace friction with comfort. Don't make a world so big that nothing inside of it has room to matter. The Elder Scrolls 6 doesn't need to prove that Bethesda can make a gigantic map. It needs to prove that Bethesda can still make a place worth getting lost in. That's the whole thing. I don't care if the game is smaller than people expect. I don't care if it has jank. I don't care if the combat's okay. I don't care if the animations are a little weird. Bethesda has survived all of that before. What it cannot survive is spatial death. It can't survive a world where the player's technically free, but never really wandering. It can't survive a Tamriel that feels like a menu of attractions, because Elder Scrolls was never just about questing. It was about being somewhere. It was about stepping into a world and letting the world interrupt you. So, no, Starfield is not literally the Elder Scrolls 6, but spiritually, structurally, yeah, I think it is. Starfield is what happens when modern Bethesda tries to make a new mythology and discovers that scale is easier than wonder. Elder Scrolls 6 is not doomed. I don't believe that. Bethesda still has the ingredients. Tamriel is still one of the strongest fantasy settings in gaming. People want to love this game. I want to love this game. But Starfield tells us exactly what it'd be afraid of. Bethesda does not need to make the biggest world. It needs to remember how to make a world worth getting lost in.